3 years before Georgette appeared at the preschool gates, trying to claim a grandson she had personally rejected, she had pressed her finger against Stella's stomach and told her son the child inside wasn't his. That was how it ended. To understand how Stella got to that moment, you have to go back to the beginning. Stella grew up in a small yellow house on the east side of Macon, Georgia. Just her and her mother, Rosalie. Rosalie had raised her alone from the start, a fact the neighborhood never let either of them forget. People spoke about Rosalie in lowered voices, as if her choices were a contagious disease, as if Stella herself were evidence of wrongdoing, a walking reminder of something shameful. But to Stella, her mother was the most decent person she'd ever known. Rosalie had worked 2 jobs for years, cleaning offices in the mornings, cashiering at a grocery store in the afternoons, and never once complained in front of her daughter. She cooked real meals even when she was exhausted. She taught Stella how to sew, how to stretch a dollar, how to hold her head up when people talked. Stella carried all of that into adulthood. By 27, she was working at a local fabric and alterations shop, making decent money doing tailoring and custom work. She had a small apartment, a second-hand car that mostly ran, and a quiet life she'd built piece by piece. She met Deacon at a friend's birthday party. Not the sort of thing she usually attended. He was easy to talk to, not flashy about his family's money the way she'd expected a man from a background like his to be. His mother, Georgette, ran a mid-size real estate company on the north side of Macon. Deacon managed properties for her. He'd grown up comfortable, and you could tell, but he wasn't cruel about it. They dated for almost a year before Stella met Georgette. Deacon kept the relationship quiet at first. She understood why, even if it stung a little. He knew his mother. When the time finally came, Stella dressed carefully. She brought a tin of lemon pound cake she'd made herself. She said, "Yes, ma'am," and "No, ma'am," and tried to smile through every silence. Georgette looked at Stella the way some people look at a piece of furniture that doesn't match the room. "I know your mother," she said eventually, not as a compliment. "Yes, ma'am, Rosalie, she's a good woman." Georgette smiled in a way that had no warmth in it. "People talked about her for years, you know, all over this side of town." Deacon started to speak, but Stella got there first. "I've heard everything there is to hear. She raised me by herself and gave me everything she had. That's what I know about her." The room went quiet. Georgette stood up and said she had something to attend to, and left them sitting there with the pound cake untouched. Deacon proposed 6 weeks later. Georgette eventually gave her blessing. Whether out of genuine acceptance or because she knew her son well enough to pick her battles, Stella couldn't say. She would only understand later that it was neither. It was strategy. The wedding was small. Georgette had been clear about that from the start. No big reception, no extravagance, nothing that drew attention to a match she'd never wanted. Stella's side of the guest list was Rosalie, 2 neighbors who'd watched her grow up, and a handful of women from the fabric shop. Deacon's side was larger and louder, and mostly pretended Stella wasn't new. She still felt happy. Deacon was beside her, and for a while that felt like enough. They moved into a room in Georgette's house, while they saved to get their own place. That had been the arrangement Georgette proposed, and Deacon agreed before asking Stella. She didn't say anything about that. She told herself it was temporary. Georgette started the slow work immediately. The washing machine was off limits. Stella was to wash things by hand to save electricity. The kitchen had a schedule Stella kept violating by accident. Every meal she made was critiqued. Too bland, too spicy, not what Deacon was used to. When Stella suggested having Rosalie over for Sunday dinner, Georgette found reasons why that particular Sunday didn't work. Then the next one. Then the one after that. "She's just particular," Deacon said. "She doesn't want me here," Stella said. "Give her time." Stella gave her time. Then, Chandra came back. Chandra had gone to study in London around the time Deacon and Stella met. She was tall and polished, the daughter of a family Georgette had known for decades. She and Deacon had dated for 2 years before she left. Georgette had never stopped talking about her like she'd stepped out for coffee and was due back any minute. When Chandra walked into Georgette's living room with a bottle of wine and a smile that knew exactly what it was doing, Stella felt something settle in her stomach like a stone. "You must be Stella," Chandra said, warm as a recruitment ad. "Deacon told me so much about you." Georgette took Chandra's arm and steered her toward the kitchen. "Come, tell me everything." Stella stood in the living room and finished washing the glass in her hand. Chandra started coming around 3-4 times a week. She helped Georgette in the kitchen, remembered how Deacon liked his coffee, asked after Georgette's joints. She made herself indispensable in the way of someone who had studied the operation carefully and knew exactly which part she was applying for. Deacon had to travel for work, 2 weeks in Atlanta, then a conference in Charlotte. Stella was alone in the house with Georgette, and the temperature dropped noticeably. Around that time, a man named Remy moved into the small guest cottage at the back of the property. Georgette owned it separately and rented it out occasionally. Remy was a physician at a clinic 30 minutes away. Quiet, polite, working long hours. He introduced himself to Stella in the driveway one morning, and that was mostly the extent of their acquaintance. Then Georgette started inviting him to dinner. Stella noticed but didn't think much of it at first. Georgette invited people over regularly. She treated Remy like a son, brought him plates of food, asked how the clinic was going. The discomfort came gradually, as Georgette began manufacturing situations that put Stella and Remy in the same room, leaving the two of them to manage dinner while she ran errands, asking Remy to fix something in the kitchen while Stella was cooking, insisting Stella sit and keep him company while Georgette finished folding laundry. "I don't think this is a good idea," Stella told her once. "People might get the wrong idea." "What idea?" Georgette said with a face so innocent it was almost impressive. "He's a tenant, he fixes things. Why do you make everything so complicated?" Stella tried to avoid it. She ate earlier or later, stayed upstairs when she heard Remy's car pull in. One evening Georgette made lemonade. She brought a tall glass to Stella without being asked, which was unusual enough that Stella noticed it. But Rosalie had raised her not to be ungrateful, so she drank it. Within half an hour, she could barely keep her eyes open. She told Georgette she was going to lie down, went to the bedroom, and was asleep before she could kick off her shoes. She didn't hear Remy come in. She didn't hear anything. What she heard was Georgette's voice, loud and theatrical, at some hour that was still dark outside. "Oh my God, Deacon, come in here." Stella came awake like someone had thrown cold water on her. The room was wrong. There was an arm near her on the bed. She sat up and found Remy there, still fully dressed, clearly just as disoriented as she was. Deacon was in the doorway. She had never seen his face look like that before. Like something behind his eyes had cracked clean down the middle. "Deacon." She got to her feet. "This isn't what it looks like. I don't know how he got in here." "Don't," he said it quietly. That was worse than shouting. Georgette was already crying, performing it with both hands over her mouth. "I had my suspicions for weeks. I didn't want to say anything. I kept hoping I was wrong." Remy sat up, rubbing his face. "Something happened here. I don't remember coming into this room. I had dinner and then—" He looked at the glass on the nightstand. His voice went flat. "Someone did this to us." "Listen to them," Georgette said, still making excuses. Deacon looked at Stella for a long moment. She saw the exact second he decided what he believed. "Get out," he said. "Deacon, please. I want you gone tonight. I'm pregnant." She hadn't planned to say it like that. Not in this room, not like this. But it came out because it was true. 3 months along, she had been saving it for the right moment. "That is your child. Deacon, look at me. You know me. Please look at me." Georgette cut across the room. "That baby isn't Deacon's. We can all see that now, can't we?" Deacon went very still. "I have never once been unfaithful to you," Stella said. Her voice was breaking, and she couldn't stop it. "Not once. In 3 years, not once." He left without answering. Georgette stepped aside to let him pass, then turned back to Stella with an expression that was the most honest thing she'd ever shown her. "Pack what you can tonight. I'll box the rest." Stella packed one bag. She stood outside at midnight with it, waiting for the car she'd called, and phoned Rosalie. Rosalie didn't ask any questions. She just said, "I'll leave the light on." The divorce papers arrived 8 weeks later. Stella signed them at Rosalie's kitchen table, without making a ceremony of it. She had the baby 6 months after that. Alone in the sense that mattered, without a husband, without anyone from his family who wanted to be there. But Rosalie was in the delivery room holding her hand through every contraction, and when the nurses placed the baby boy on Stella's chest for the first time, Rosalie covered her mouth and cried the way people cry when something breaks them open with joy instead of grief. Stella named him Ezra. He had a round face and a serious expression, and he looked unmistakably like his father. Remy had found out she was in labor through the particular chain of information that small towns generate on their own. He came to the hospital not as her doctor. He had no standing there, just as the man who understood what had been done to both of them and couldn't sit still about it. He'd already tried to tell Deacon. He'd been turned away at the door. "I'm sorry," he said, when Stella was sitting up with Ezra asleep on her chest. "I should have understood sooner what she was setting up." "You didn't do anything wrong," Stella said. "Neither of us did." He started stopping by every few weeks after that. He brought things Ezra needed without making a production of it. He fixed the water heater at Rosalie's house one afternoon, without being asked, and was gone before dinner. He was just there, consistently, in the way of someone who understood that showing up was the only apology that meant anything. Deacon married Chandra 4 months after the divorce was finalized. People in Macon talked about the wedding the way people talk about events designed to be talked about. Georgette was photographed smiling wider than Stella had ever seen her smile. She posted it everywhere. Stella pressed her hand flat on the kitchen table when she heard, and said to herself the same thing she'd said every day since she left. "Keep going." She went back to the fabric shop. She took on more custom orders, built up a client list, started saving. Rosalie kept Ezra during the day and reported every new development with the urgency of a woman watching history unfold. He said, "Mama today," Rosalie told her one evening, her voice all broken up with feeling, "just walked over to me with a piece of cracker and said it plain as anything." "He thinks you're his mama too," Stella said. "He's not wrong." 2 years passed. Ezra was a solid little person by then. Curious, loud when he wanted to be, gentle with the stray cat that had wandered into Rosalie's yard and stayed. He'd started preschool that fall, which Stella had cried about in the car after drop-off and told absolutely no one. It was Rosalie who first ran into Georgette. She'd picked Ezra up from school on a Thursday. Georgette's car was on the street, something to do with a property nearby she would claim later. But Rosalie thought she'd been circling that neighborhood for longer than she let on, because of what she did next. She got out of the car and blocked their path on the sidewalk. She looked at Ezra for a long time without speaking. Ezra looked back at her with the calm, vaguely judgmental gaze of a 2-year-old who does not automatically extend courtesy to strangers. "That's Deacon's boy," Georgette said finally. "Not even a question." Rosalie's voice went very quiet, the way it always did when she was truly furious. "You threw my daughter out at midnight when she was 3 months pregnant. You engineered that entire situation and then cried about it while your son beat her. And now you're going to stand here and tell me about Deacon's boy? I only want to." "You wanted to destroy her. You did that. You don't get to decide you want something different now." Rosalie picked Ezra up. "Stay away from this school. Stay away from this child. And if I find out you've come near him, you'll find out exactly how far I'm willing to take it." She walked away and didn't look back. Stella heard all of it that evening on the phone and sat for a while without saying anything. "She'll try again," she said finally. "I know," said Rosalie. She did try again. A week later, Georgette appeared at Stepping Stones and told the woman at the front desk that she was Ezra's grandmother, that Stella had asked her to pick him up early. The teacher, a woman named Gail who had worked there for 9 years and recognized every person on every child's approved contact list, said she would need to call Stella to confirm. Stella's phone rang while she was in the middle of pinning a hem. She was at the school in 11 minutes. Georgette was standing near the hallway door when Stella came through the entrance. She looked older than Stella remembered. Not just in years, but in the way of someone who had been carrying constant worry and wasn't sleeping through it. Stella stopped in front of her. "You told them you were picking up my son. He is my..." "No." The word came out the way her mother's final words always did. "3 years ago you stood in your own house and told Deacon that child wasn't his blood. You said it in front of both of us. You made sure he believed it. Now Ezra is 2 years old and looks exactly like Deacon looked at that age, and you want to walk into his school." She paused to let that sit. "Let me be very clear with you. You are not on any pickup list for this child. You are not authorized to approach him here or anywhere else. If you come back to this school, I will file for a restraining order the same afternoon. Do you understand me?" Georgette opened her mouth. "I'm done talking," Stella said. "Go home." She went inside, signed Ezra out, buckled him into his car seat, and then sat in the parking lot for 2 minutes with her hands on the wheel, letting herself shake before she drove. That same month, men Stella didn't recognize knocked on Georgette's door looking for Chandra. The story came out the way those stories do, in towns where everyone knows someone who knows someone. Chandra had debts. Substantial ones accumulated through gambling and bad investments that had looked briefly like opportunities. She had forged Georgette's signature on a loan agreement, using the promise of returns that were never going to materialize. She had also, in the months she'd spent as Georgette's daughter-in-law, made herself the trusted person who helped open the safe when Georgette's arthritis was bothering her. By the time anyone connected the pieces, she was gone, and so was the better part of Georgette's liquid assets and most of the jewelry. Deacon came home to his mother sitting at the kitchen table, looking smaller than he'd ever seen her, and a number on a piece of paper that represented a debt impossible to pay without selling property. He spent 3 days on that problem before it occurred to him to find Remy. They met outside a coffee shop on a Tuesday morning. Remy told him everything: the lemonade, waking up in a room he had no memory of entering, the certainty he'd had from the first morning that he'd been placed there deliberately. He told Deacon he had tried to say so at the time. He told him Stella had done nothing and known nothing, and had spent 2 years building her life back from nothing, because Deacon had chosen to believe a lie his mother had constructed for him. Deacon drove to Georgette's house and sat across from her at the kitchen table. He asked her once. She looked out the window, then she said, "I never thought Chandra would turn on us this way." "That's not what I asked you." She didn't answer, which was its own answer. "Stella was telling the truth the whole time," he said. Georgette pressed her lips together. "Stella wasn't right for this family. Stella was my wife." His voice didn't rise. "She was carrying my son. And you arranged for me to find her in a situation you built from scratch, because you knew exactly what I'd do. You knew I wouldn't stop to think." He sat back. "I need to know one thing. When you saw Ezra at that school, does he look like me?" She said nothing, but her face did. He drove to Stella's shop on a Wednesday. He stood outside for a long time, then went in. Stella had her back to the door and was working at the cutting table. She heard the bell and said she'd be right with them. When she turned and saw who it was, she set down her scissors carefully. "What do you need, Deacon?" He looked at her. He looked around the shop, the bolts of fabric, the finished pieces pinned to a display board by the door, a drawing Ezra had made that was taped to the register. He said, "I know what my mother did. I know Remy told me the truth. I know Ezra is my son." He paused. "I'm sorry, Stella. I know that doesn't come close to covering it." "It doesn't," she said. "I'd like to know him." She looked at him for a while. "Ezra is 2 years old. When he's old enough to understand what it means to have a father who chose not to be there, and when he decides for himself that he wants to know you, I will support that. But I am not going to bring a stranger into his life because you've had a change of heart now that things have gotten hard for you." "That's fair," he said. "It's not fair. None of this was fair. It's just what I'm willing to offer." He nodded. He thanked her. He left. That evening, Remy came by with soup from the place on 3rd Street that Rosalie liked. He'd brought extra bread because Ezra ate an unreasonable amount of bread for a person his size. He set everything on the kitchen table and sat down without making a ceremony of any of it. "How are you holding up?" he asked. "I've been worse," Stella said. "I've been better." "That covers a lot of ground." "It does." Rosalie was at the stove with her back to them, and Stella could tell by the particular stillness of her shoulders that she was listening very carefully and pretending very hard not to be. Stella looked at Remy. She'd spent a long time afraid of her own judgment, afraid that caring about someone meant handing them a weapon they'd eventually use. But Remy had been there, quietly and without condition, for 2 years. He had never once made her feel like she owed him anything for it, and that, she had come to understand, was the difference between someone who wanted credit and someone who just wanted to be there. "I'm glad you're here," she said. He looked at her the way he did when she said something he was glad to hear but didn't want to oversell. Just a small, careful expression, like he was putting it somewhere safe. "Me too." Ezra held up a piece of bread across the table and offered it to him with great solemnity. Remy accepted it like it was something worth having. Rosalie laughed from the stove. Outside, the evening was cooling down, the yard was quiet, and the porch light was on. The way it always was at Rosalie's house, so whoever needed to find their way home could always see it from the street. Stella had spent years measuring herself by what she'd lost: the father who never came back, the husband who'd chosen not to believe her, the house she'd left with one bag at midnight. But sitting at that table, listening to Ezra describe the bread in the serious, half-formed language of someone 2 years old, who is certain you need to understand this. She thought about something Rosalie had told her once, in the dark, when Stella was small, and the world had been unkind again. The people who are supposed to be there will stay, and the ones who leave, they make room. Deacon had left. Georgette had made sure of it. Chandra had lit the whole thing on fire on her way out the door. And the room they'd cleared, Stella had filled it herself, one careful choice at a time. She reached over and stole a piece of Ezra's bread. He looked at her with profound betrayal. "Mama," he said. "I know," she said, "life is hard sometimes." He considered this. Then he pulled off another piece and handed it to her anyway.